And welcome back, class, to Episode 5, Season 2, True and Accurate History, with our focus on Mongolia. When we left off, we were in the midst of conquering India. Now, as you recall from the past, Gandhi and Genghis Khan haven't always had the best of relationships. In fact, I would venture to say that their relationship was bad. And following the conquest of Suleiman, Genghis Khan felt that he had no choice but to complete his conquest of the major nations on the continent in order to both protect himself, expand his territory, and broaden the base of people who followed his life philosophy, that of survival of the fittest and strength, war, all that good stuff that Genghis Khan has so loved throughout history. You can see here the siege of Mumbai continuing on, and it's going pretty badly for Gandhi. The Keshik are, as usual, completely devastating. Both Monka Khan and Genghis Khan are on the front, commanding the battle. Monka Khan in the east, Genghis Khan in the west. And Mumbai is basically on the verge of capitulation. All of its defenders have been slain. There's nobody left to protect them from the Mongol horde. That's unfortunate for them, but there's very little that can be done. We saw just there in 1420, Monka Temur Khan, the son of Monka Khan, completed his training and was elevated to Khan himself, and came out to aid in the final conquest of Gandhi, India, in 1430 AD. And that was the end of all of the nations who opposed Gandhi on his continent. He already knew that there were other lands across the sea, as they had made a connection with Hanoi, and another city-state whose name escapes me at the moment. But for now, it was important to him to have his home continent secured. And it was doing pretty well, actually. With India, Suleiman, and of course the early Nebuchadnezzar out of the way, that simply left Florence and another city-state, which I believe was Monaco, in the west. Now first, Genghis Khan made some attempts to find a way into Florence. But Florence, as we said before, is extremely well protected. Monka Khan was put in charge of finding a way to invade Florence effectively. And yet we can see those barbarians still trying to make their way in. Genghis Khan was moving up the west back towards the capital, Karakoram. And there was only really one avenue of attack that the Mongols had to get in to Florence. There were hills to the south of the city, ocean to the east, mountains to the west and to the north, which gave only one position from which you could attack the city, and that was directly in front of it, right across the river, which also bordered it to the south, making it impossible to launch long-range attacks from over the water. They were basically just stuck there, and that was incredibly unfortunate, and meant that Florence had a great advantage in keeping the Mongol hordes at bay. See, they're still probing. Genghis Khan's back in Konya, overseeing the turnover of power, back where the conquest of Suleiman began. Monka Timur is being sent off to see to his duties in the south. And as we can see, there's simply no way to break in to Florence. Giving up on that, Genghis Khan ordered Monka Timur to conquer Monaco instead. And so they all headed west to conquer Monaco, leaving Florence alone for now, as there was no way to get in there without sea power, and the trireme just didn't seem good enough for Genghis Khan's tastes. So you see there, Monka Timur has been sent out. Genghis Khan will no doubt be joining them. It's good for Monka Khan's son to get some experience, as his father had overseen the great conquest of the continent. And so Genghis Khan expected great things from Monka Timur, the man's son, as well. So it was in Monka Timur's best interests to take an active hand in the conquest of Monaco. As usual, Genghis is very carefully setting up his soldiers around the city-state rather, and finding the best ranges, finding the best places from which to attack, feeling out the enemy forces. New technologies are always being discovered, especially every time they conquer new nations. They gain the technologies that those nations, well, they slowly are able to reverse engineer those technologies, especially if the scientists or inventors of those nations don't want to cooperate with the Khan. If they don't cooperate, they get put into the daily tournaments. And as you can imagine, most of the people who were coming up with scientific and mechanical innovations in countries not ruled by Genghis Khan were not exactly the most athletic of individuals. 1540, we see the beginning of the Siege of Monaco. The initial stages are overseen only by Monka Timur, as Genghis Khan felt that it would be interesting to see how the young one would take care of it, and he went through it textbook style. Took out the defenders, then moved in on the city, sent in the pikemen to bust down the walls as soon as the Keshik were done, weakening the structure. Now we see the catapults going to be getting in there as well. But mostly it's the Keshik, as usual, doing the bulk of the attacks. There's the catapult. It's very effective. It's just simply too slow and bulky. Karakoram, yeah, we see the pyramids out there. Still no one buried in there, though there's a chamber set aside for Turfan. His remains will likely never be recovered, but his memory lives on regardless, and there Monaco is captured in 1550. Very swift conquest by Monka Timur. Genghis Khan came up to the south to lend a hand towards the end of the battle, but that was Monka Timur's victory, and no one could take that away from him. More and more science started to be thought about, and in 1555 the first ocean-worthy vessel was produced. We'll see that in a moment. Yep. Produced in Istanbul and sent off on a voyage of discovery. See what they can find beyond Vienna and beyond Hanoi. Genghis Khan was, of course, very interested in finding out what the rest of the world held, if anything, beyond those two city-states which seemed to be floating in the middle of the ocean. But they quickly made contact with an entirely new civilization. They weren't really open to trade, but it was good for Genghis Khan to meet them regardless. They were called the Inca. They resided on a continent to the west of Genghis Khan's own. He immediately began plans to send exploratory parties out there, get a feel for the strength of the enemy, and start building an overseas presence, because it simply made no sense to him to see a land and not conquer it, especially when they began seeing the richness and beauty of this new world, the natural wonders which grew and demonstrated their beauty to the explorers were unlike anything that Genghis Khan had seen in his hard, rough continent. Now in 1575, the Great Wall of Mongolia was completed. It had been under construction for 200 years, but now it was finally complete, and that trireme, that barbarian galley which had been plaguing Mongolia for centuries, is finally taken out by some housekeeping now that the continent is safe. The barbarians become a priority once again. And the Great Barrier Reef, there we see in 1590, another gorgeous natural wonder, unlike anything had ever been seen on Genghis Khan's home continent. Barbarians quickly being wiped out. The Keshik sent to secure the area to the north where Turfan fell. And we see there's Geneva, yet another new city-state. And finally they met Hiawatha of the Iroquois, another nation residing in the New World, also not open to trade, but seeming peaceful enough, which, as we know, for Genghis Khan was simply an invitation. 1600 was a major innovation in warfare for Genghis Khan, when scientists from India and the former Ottoman Empire discovered that fireworks could be used as weapons as well if one took the powder from within and used it to propel a projectile. So that would create a weapon far more powerful than the bow, but with a less reliable range, and one that tended to scare the horses when it was fired from their back. So the horses needed to be retrained, and Genghis Khan was reluctant to give up the Keshik, as they had served him extremely well. In 1615, a settler set out to found a new city in the far north tundra. It was a city that Genghis Khan had been planning to found for centuries, ever since the death of Mongolia's first explorer, Turfan. And explorers were very quickly sent over to the New World and to a smaller continent which had been discovered to the east, or even further to the west. There we go, Turfan, named in honor of that mighty warrior, is founded in 1630 AD, far north of the Mongol home continent. It's a fitting memorial to the man who started it all. And at last, his sacrifice was recognized, and Xia was also founded in the following year. So, this continent, down in the southeast, seemed to be inhabited entirely by a trio of city-states who had an uneasy alliance, and Genghis Khan, seeing that there were rich resources on that island, or island continent, immediately set out to build a colony, the first overseas colony, which the world would see. At the same time, the first group of Keshik horsemen discovered a rifle in some ancient ruins, which fired more quietly and more accurately, allowing it to be shot from horseback without spooking the horses much. There was an inscription they found in those ruins on that little continent. The inscription read Washington. They didn't know what that meant, but they figured it didn't really matter. 1665, Old Sarai is founded. The first overseas colony that Genghis Khan had created, and his foothold on this southern continent, inhabited by Brussels, Geneva, I think, and Seoul. And the exploration of the New World, a much larger and much more lush continent, also continued. And yet another natural wonder was found, this time a volcanic island called Krakatoa, which really appealed to Genghis Khan. The exploration, of course, is continuing. All sorts of fascinating discoveries are being made in this new world. The countries, the nations, the Iroquois and the Inca, have no interest in trading with Genghis Khan, but he figures he can find some way to deal with them, even if they don't want to. Now that weapon that was discovered by the Keshik on the island there, the Washington rifle, was brought back and reverse engineered, and rifling was discovered, and would soon be put into practice. The pikemen would be trained up with rifles and given the ability to defend the cities more powerfully. We also see Chichen Itza in 1705, a gorgeous building on the main continent. And next time we're going to see their continued explorations of the New World. So until then, all the best.